Welcome to the Catbird Quilts. I'm Kathy Martin, and today's video is on my sewing table, and as usual, I have a lot to say about it. So stay with me. If you saw my video about the Super Scrappy Challenge, where I have put together a quilt top that I'm in the process of turning it into a quilt to submit to QuiltCon 2024, you will already recognize the blue that I'm resting on right now. I finished the quilt top, we made that video, and then realized, oh gosh, now I have to do the quilting. And so I actually do practice what I preach. And so I made a practice quilt to work out my quilting design and colors and everything else. And I wanted to show it to you today. So here it is. So there's it really is like a little mini Mark Rothko quilt. But I wanted to show you a few things. I threw this together over the course of a couple of days. I did not spend the kind of time and care and energy that I did on the very large quilt top, but it is all the same fabrics with maybe just like the slightest exception. And so some of you had asked, or you wanted to see some of the specifics of each fabric. So we can give you a close-up here of that. There are a couple missing in the navy. Everything else is the same as on the big quilt. But you can see these are all shirts. This is fabric that was given to me. This is that Moda Grunge. This is the linen that has the starch in it that I want to wash out. And a lot of you are like, don't wash it. And we'll get to that. And then this is a shirt, this is a shirt, and this is a shirt. And this, as you can see, is a selvage that I was like the perfect color blue, and I thought it was funny. And so, yeah, my practice quilt says birth upside down. It was birthday. It's birthday fabric. And this blue selvage was attached to this pink fabric with polka dots that I love. It literally looks like sprinkles on pink icing. And I just love it. But I thought that it was funny. So I have by Star Society instead of Ruby, and then birth at the top of this practice quilt. So just wanted to tell you a few things. Like 1,000. things about this quilt. When I was considering the quilting, really what kind of shoulda, coulda, woulda happened is I should have sent that quilt top off to a long arm quilter to do professionally so that it would really be done to the standard that I want. But I have backed myself into a corner with time. And so here we are. So my plan for the real quilt, I'm going to be back and forth between big quilt and practice quilt and mini quilt. And so just try to stay with me. Initially, I thought I would do just straight lines vertically, and then it felt like it made it look too long. I didn't actually do that. I drew them all out. And then I did the horizontal, but because the lines are horizontal, I don't know, I felt like it would maybe not line up. So what I settled on, and I'm going to turn the quilt over to demonstrate this because you may not be able to see it from this shot, is a diagonal lines. The plan here, hopefully you'll get the vision, is that it's all these diagonal lines in this blue section. And then that same line continues into the yellow with the yellow stitching. And then that same line continues down into the orange. Now you'll see there were some places that I didn't make it all the way to the edge. And we could talk about that, but I won't. I did want to stop before I go any further. I have not done this yet. The only quilting I've done has been with white or dove gray. I did a little bit in a pale blue. And so I had this idea that I would do the same color quilting as the actual multiform element for two reasons. The first reason is I did not want it to detract in any way from the fabrics because it is very scrappy. And the point is for it to look like that brush strokes and kind of color wash of the Mark Rothko artwork. So I wanted to stay at least in the family. And then I also decided to carry that through to the back because I wanted it to kind of look like line art. So the back would look actually reminiscent of the front and maybe hide some of my lack of skill in thread tension. Although what it does not hide is when the lines are not straight, but we won't talk about that either. So I splurged and I spent half a day on the Aurifil website. So I went to the Aurifil website to try to come up with what color. Sorry, I see this thread sticking out. And for some reason I have to do right now, I have to fix this instead of doing this after the video is over. Trying to find the right combination of colors for that yellow, red. Sorry, that's not yellow. That's blue, red, yellow, orange. And I settled on this Perfect Box of Colors by Pat Sloan. And apparently she's the voice of quilting. I really like Pat Sloan. I think she's so great. She has the best energy. But anyway, so here's the Perfect Box of Colors. And when I tell you, I opened this box up and went, oh, because I've only had gray and cream and tan. And I feel like I could just, if I was having a bad day, I could just open up this box and look at these threads. Now, it was a splurge. So I want to put that out there. But this is the orange. Actually, let me turn this quilt back over. So this is the orange. And then this is the red, and it is really, really close. The yellow, I was concerned that that was a little too mustard, and the blue seemed a little too bright. So I actually went back to the drawing board on those two, and I picked this pale yellow, which there's nothing pale about that, in my opinion. And then this blue that I think is called medium Delft blue, which, by the way, if you want to spend a really wonderful half day in being inspired on the Aurifil website, I encourage you to do that. The end result is these colors are remarkably close. So you can see the quilting. It's not like it's invisible, but it doesn't call attention to the quilting, which is what I want. I want the piecing to be the thing you pay attention to because that's what I can do. The quilting, not as much. So I settled on my threads, super excited about that. Let me put actually these go back. Look at that. Oh, thank you, Pat Sloan, for some beautiful curated Aurifil thread. So I did each block in its respective color. And if you saw that video about the Super Scrappy Challenge and the quilt top, I was really trying to work this idea of thirds. And so what kind of has happened is this is a little more than 2/3 of the way this way, and then that's kind of in the middle, and then 2/3 orange. So it still is kind of playing with that idea. You'll notice, those of you that saw the other video, and I think someone even commented, are you going to do facing or binding? And the answer at the time was, I don't know. I've never done facing. And so I've now done facing or knife edge. It's also called knife edge binding, I think. I see a little thread right there. And so I tried it. This is actually, all of this is scrap fabric as well. This is a pillowcase. This is a shirt, this kind of, tannish gray, grayish taupe, whatever you want to call it. And I actually really enjoyed it. I thought I was going to hate it because I like binding. Actually, I'm one of those weirdos that likes that. The upside is that when you do facing on, you do the top and bottom, and then sew it and press it, and then sew the edge, and then hand bind it or hand stitch it, And then you have to go back and do that same process on the sides. So it's not a continual. Upside of that is you don't have to do the mitered corners. Downside to that is it's a sew and press and sew and press and then sit down and hand stitch and then sew and press and sew and press and then sit down and hand stitch. I think I did an okay job of it. I did learn where the 1/8 inch mark is on my sewing machine, which felt like a win. It's the small wins around here, really and truly. The things that I've heard negatively about facing, and I found this to be true, those corners are pretty thick because it's the turned edge from the front and then that same turned edge from the front of the side back onto each other. And so it's very, very thick there. And stitching that down the side was not a walk in the park. Although depending on what park you have near you, might have been easier than a walk in the park. Some parks are not as enjoyable to walk around. But anyway, so that's that. I see areas, I mean, everything is a learning process, I think, really in life, but especially in quilting, and especially because I'm still relatively new and somewhat inexperienced, which I'm not ashamed of. I'm proud of that. I'm learning. I haven't been quilting for 20 years. Not really sure why I decided that I wanted to submit a quilt to QuiltCon to an international quilt competition, having no skill in quilting. But, hey, I think that's kind of the way I roll. So I learned a lot about facing, and I think I am actually going to face the final quilt as opposed to doing binding, just because it does make it such a nice, clean edge, and it has that art quilt look about it as opposed to like the frame. If you'll remember, and maybe we can show a picture, the quilt top will have a border around it. I'm not a big fan of borders, but if you look at Mark Rothko's work, all of his artworks have that edge around it that's not the color block, multiform shapes. And so I really was trying to emulate what he did. But I do think that having that border plus binding might make it a little visually distracting. So, of course, I had already cut and sewn my binding. And so here it is. This will be the same red. But what will happen, obviously, is this will be on the back instead of on the front like a frame. And so that's the look that I'm kind of going for. So I learned a lot. I did use the tape off method. So I used my blue painter's tape and just stretched it across and used my walking foot to mirror that. I've had much more success on the small scale than I have on the large scale. Lots of things I'm not going to talk about today. We'll leave that at that also. But the taping works beautifully. So if you have thought to yourself, oh, I wonder how I can have uniform lines, that is a great way. So what I did is I stretched the tape across and I literally just put my walking foot right along the edge and followed it and then did the next piece of tape and so on and so forth. So I can attest it does work. I do want to suggest to you, if you're interested in doing facing as opposed to binding, Tiny Orchard Quilts has an excellent tutorial. I really love her, y'all. She's so great. But she has an excellent tutorial. We'll put that in the description box below the video. And if you're interested in it. Now, there are multiple ways, as always, in all quilting. Some people do the corner piece and they use the corner to turn. I decided just to go for the kind of minimalistic, just straight line look. So that's why I followed her tutorial. And maybe on into the fall season, we'll do some comparisons between binding and facing, but we'll see. So that's that. The big one, I hope it looks half as good as the practice. I will say, the thing about quilting is, even if you make a practice quilt, you have to make a whole quilt. with every element, the piecing, the batting, the backing, the quilt sandwich, and that is laborious and can feel counterproductive because it is time. It took the time that it took me to make the practice quilt and then practice on it with the quilting. The whole time I was finding myself saying, I'm wasting time. I'm wasting time. I'm wasting time. I should be quilting on the big quilt. But the reality is I learned so much on this practice quilt and I made so many mistakes, but it was on the practice quilt. And so in my facing where I didn't get it lined up exactly right, and before I had figured out exactly where my 1/8 inch mark was on my presser foot so that I could do that top stitching, I learned all that on this quilt. And that's the beauty and the point of the practice quilt. And so even though as I'm now quilting the big one and I'm swearing and trying not to cry and also ironically or paradoxically also really proud at the same time, I know that I have worked out some of those details already. So it's really just a matter of doing it as well as I can on the big guy. All right, so that's enough about that. If you have any questions, you can always put them in the comments. Happy to talk about it. Next up, K-facet fabric and flying geese. So I recently did a fabric pull for the K-facet back quarters that I was given that were in the warm family. So oranges, pinks, reds, and I've talked about that and how I have never done flying geese before. And so I've picked a pattern that uses flying geese. And I think I even made the remark, I have no idea when I'll start this project because I have so many other projects that I need to wrap up for the love of all things good and holy. But because I'm me, I just couldn't not at least make practice a couple of practices and see if it is in fact going to look like what I imagine in my mind's eye. And thank goodness it does. And I wanted to show you. So the website that led me to this pattern was Inspired Quilting by Leah Louise. And we'll put that link in the description as well. And in it, she has a link to a 4 at a time flying geese tutorial. So I had picked the fabrics, as you know. If you haven't seen that video, you can see it so you can know where I'm going with this. And it is a free pattern, by the way. It's Flying Home Quilt by Moda, and it is a really great pattern. So the way it starts is we have this 9 1/4 inch square blocks and then 5 inch squares. I'm using shirts. I'm using white shirts or white shirt fabric. I'm going to try to see if I can do it with 3 shirts. I might have to eke out of another 4th shirt. But so what you do is you have that original square. You put your 5 inch background squares and then they overlap a little. You mark that center. I have pinned mine because I don't trust myself when I sew. Sometimes I'm distracted. And you sew a 1/4 inch seam on either side of these marks. And what that does, if you can't visualize it, this will get folded. Well, they'll be cut down the center and then this will be folded back that way. And this will be folded back this way. And then the other 5 inch square gets sewn here and folded back. And so that's how you get all of the 4 flying geese out of one big square, which I really, really love. I don't love snowball corners because, or the kind where you flip and then you trim them off, because then you end up with all of these triangles. And you can make great things out of them for sure, but it feels wasteful to me. So I really, really like this. This is called, some people call it the no waste flying geese method. And so sure enough, it is as promised. And this is what it looks like. And one of the things that I have talked about in previous videos about K-facet fabric is wanting to highlight the vibrancy and the interesting design and beauty of those fabrics. But for me, I don't like them really right up against each other. Now, that's a whole look, clearly, and that's definitely these all came from the same line. But having them outlined basically in some other fabric, to me, really celebrates those fabrics the best. So you can see where this is going. This is just 2 out of, I think I have 8 to go. I'm actually excited. I could really abandon the Mark Rothko quilt at this point and just make these. It's very rewarding. It's not what I need to be doing. I think they're really pretty, and I was surprised at how little I had to trim. A lot of times when you do these sorts of things, half square triangles, half rectangle triangles, there's a lot of trimming. I had just the slightest little bit to get them to the size. And you can see it's going to be nice big flying geese. So I'm really looking forward to that. They will be all in these fat quarters and in the solid colors that go with it. So bright pink, bright red, bright orange. And you can tell I'm getting excited about it. And I really want to spend my time doing that instead of laboriously quilting the quilt that needs to be quilted. But anyway, so that is that. And I just thought maybe you would appreciate seeing a little glimpse of what may be coming down the road. So it's not all I have to say about that, but that's all I'll have to say about that for now. And next, I want to show you some of the blocks from my youngest's graduation quilt. So more of these blocks, which, by the way, so fun to sew. I can just zip these things out. I'm doing it the strip sewing way, which if you watch that video about strip sewing, I was really not a fan, but these 16-inch strips are manageable for me and go quickly. I have now done 3 of the 5 rows. So I showed you in the last on my sewing table, I showed you row 1. And I really probably don't need to go through all of these, but this particular one, actually these particular 2 are super fun. And here's the reason. We're in October now. And because of all of this black and white, it just feels Halloween-y to me. And I'll show you on this one. Look at these fun spider webs. It really has totally put me in the mood for Halloween, just making these blocks. The previous row had skulls and bats and moons. This one, which will be kind of butt up against it, has the spider webs, which I hated this fabric when we bought this. I was just like, I mean, really? But it looks great up against the others. You know, I'm a fan of polka dots. Actually, this one has 2. It has this big bright ones, and then it has this little bitty ones, and then the little mountain triangles. As a reminder, when you do the strip sewing and then you turn it around to make these kind of blocks, I forget every time. All of the fabrics are not going to be directionally in the same way. So some of my little mountains are pointing down and some of my little mountains are pointing up. So if you are doing a checkerboard block of any kind in the future, don't be like me. Remember that when you do that, turn it around situation, your directional prints will be directional the wrong way. So that spider web, super, super fun. Very much an October thing. And then this is the Moda Grunge that somebody recommended, actually many somebodies in the comments. So thank you to all of you who are like, it's a great blender, Moda Grunge. It is, in fact, a great blender. So that's row 2. And then really, really, really quick. I don't really do anything quick. Definitely not on this channel, and definitely not when I'm talking about it. But row 4 for me has been the favorite one to sew, and I'll show you why. So this is a black shirt, and just that plain black is so lovely. I'm going to have to do some work to trim the back so that it doesn't have that shadowing. But look at that. I just love that floral. I think it's so pretty. This one is kind of interesting. It's both geometric and has almost like butterflies on it. This one, for some reason, was super pleasing to me. And this is a great example, by the way, these next three, of how black fabric sometimes is not actually truly black. So you'll go, oh, that's black, unless you see it up against black. And if you see it up against a pretty true black, it's actually almost brown. I don't know if that will show. Sometimes color science is tricky with videos, but that tan gray circle color is affected by the colors around it. And so even if that black was very truly black, which it's not, the introduction of those tan gray circles makes it feel more brown. And the next one is even more that way. So this has white and tan all interspersed throughout it, which, by the way, that to me looks like a cityscape almost, like a city at night. And here again, you can see this appears more brown up against this very black. And then this one, which is actually, the background is pretty black, but because it's got these gold stars in it, it very much reads a dark charcoal brown as opposed to black. So when we were laying out the fabrics on our living room floor, trying to figure out how to mix these together, that is a little bit blacker in the background, but it does, just from a distance especially, look very brown. So what we did is we picked these two blacks that are very black, but that white in the middle starts bridging the gap. And then as it goes, it essentially gets a little more brown. Now, I don't know if that's kind of, I may be getting a little esoteric. If you were here in the living room or in our living room with us, when we laid out all of these black fabrics, it's like, well, they're all black. It should work in any combination. And it really did not. And so this was how we did the bridge to go from this very black to this star pattern that looks kind of brown, really, especially in context. But this row 4, was super exciting to sew together. Like every time I pulled out a new fabric, I'm like, oh, just got really excited. And I skipped row 3 because that's the one that has the fabric. There's a placeholder fabric for one of those blocks. Neither one of us really love it, but we haven't found a replacement one for it yet. It may just have to be. But I skipped that and went to row 4. And I'm so glad that I did, because it was really super fun to sew. So you can kind of see how this is going to come together. It is going to be very, very high contrast, very stark, I think. But also, I think it's going to be hopefully going to be really stunning. And it's exactly what she wants, which is very hard to accomplish sometimes. So that is the progress, for those of you wondering the progress on the graduation quilt. If you're wondering why I have pink shirts on my design wall, I mentioned recently that I just have this thing for pink shirts for some reason lately. And after I got them out of the wash, I was like, oh, that's so pretty. Oh, that's so pretty. And so I pinned them up, and now I'm, of course, in full thought process, trying to figure out how I'm going to use those pink shirts, what I'm going to use those pink shirts for. But it felt like it's a great time to put them up and just appreciate the glorious fabrics that are in men's dress shirts. So that's it for today on my sewing table. It doesn't look like a lot, really. And honestly, it's because the quilt is the Mark Rothko quilt, the Super Scrappy Challenge quilt, is kind of demanding all my time. So I'm really honestly ready to have it up and out so I can get back to doing these fun things and the Quilty Stars and the other things that I have going on. So thanks for being with me. I appreciate your encouragement as I've been making that Mark Rothko quilt, and also those of you that have stayed interested in my youngest graduation quilt and ask about it. That's so meaningful to me, and you know, when I finally get it all done, we'll have to talk about that too. So thanks for coming along. I'm Kathy Martin. This is the Catbird Quilts. Thanks so much for watching.